Arthur stood in my living room, confidently showing strangers around as if my home already belonged to him. My chest tightened, but decades of sacrifice had taught me to mask the sting with steady resolve. I stepped forward, introduced myself as the rightful owner, and watched his smile falter in front of the guests. Little did he know, this was just the first move in a much bigger game I was prepared to play. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I woke to the faint hum of voices drifting down the hallway, the smell of coffee faint but sharp in the early spring air. My house was always quiet in the mornings, just me, the ticking of the old wall clock, and the occasional creak from the oak floors. But today, there was something different. The sound was muffled, low, urgent. I eased out of bed, my slippers whispering against the rug as I padded toward the kitchen. Dean's voice was unmistakable, deep, with that clipped edge he used when he didn't want to be overheard. Transfer. Paperwork. Mom won't know. The words stopped me cold, my hand resting lightly on the doorframe. I stayed just out of sight, close enough to catch the rhythm of his breathing between sentences. His tone was rehearsed, deliberate. Next week, while she's out. A pause, then a quiet, "Yeah, she trusts me." I leaned back, my heart thudding, a slow, deliberate beat. I didn't step into the kitchen. I didn't announce myself. Instead, I turned away, letting the shadows swallow me again. There would be no confrontation, not yet. By the time I entered the kitchen, Dean was all smiles, pouring coffee into my favorite mug. "Morning, Mom," he said, too bright, too polite. Callista, perched on the other side of the counter, was scrolling her phone. She glanced up with a honeyed smile. "We were just talking about how a smaller place might be easier for you. Less to take care of." It wasn't phrased as a question. I took the coffee, inhaling its warmth but keeping my eyes on her. "This house is just fine for me." Dean chuckled, avoiding my gaze. Sure. Just thinking ahead." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "A realtor friend of mine happened to be in the neighborhood yesterday. She might stop by, no pressure, of course." The words landed with an unnatural casualness, like a stone dropped into still water. I stirred my coffee slowly, masking the way my pulse was climbing. A knock at the door cut through the moment. When I opened it, there stood Mrs. Landry, my neighbor from across the street, holding a small bundle of envelopes. "These came to my box by mistake," she said, passing them over. I thanked her, my eyes scanning the stack. Amid grocery flyers and bills was a thick, cream-colored envelope addressed to Dean, from a law firm downtown. The return address sparked something deep in my memory. I slid it quietly under the folded section of the mail, keeping my voice calm. "Thanks, Marjorie. How's that garden of yours?" She beamed, launching into a story about her tulips. I nodded, smiled, and closed the door behind her. Then I slipped the envelope into the drawer beneath the phone stand, far from Dean's sight. Later, as I sat in my sunroom, my fingers traced the worn arm of the chair, the one my late husband used to favor. A memory came back unbidden. Dean, 20 years younger, deciding to sell my old car without asking because it wasn't safe for me. He had said it was for my own good, but it had left me stranded until he brought me something he thought was better. Now here we were again, decisions being made without me, about my life, my home. I reached for the small leather notebook on the side table and opened it to a fresh page. The pen felt heavy but sure in my hand. Date, time, words overheard. I wrote them all down. That evening, from the top of the stairs, I caught another fragment of his voice. "Bridge Club next Thursday. Perfect time for a walkthrough." I stepped back into the shadows, my breath steady. Downstairs, I could hear the faint clinking of glasses, the low hum of conversation. I turned toward the window. The late afternoon light caught the wood grain of the banister, the same one my husband polished by hand every month. My eyes moved to the front lawn, the old oak tree, the brick path that had seen decades of footsteps. They might be making plans, but so was I. This house wasn't just a building, it was the last piece of him I still had. And I wasn't about to let it go quietly. Sunday lunches at Arthur's house had once been the kind of tradition I looked forward to. Laughter in the kitchen, kids darting between the chairs, the smell of roast chicken and fresh bread filling the air. This one was no different in appearance. The autumn light poured in through the wide kitchen windows, glinting off the polished oak table. Bryn, ever the gracious hostess, welcomed me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She moved with the kind of authority that made it clear who was in charge here, directing people where to sit with a hand on their shoulders, a cheerful word, a slight push. When it came to me, her cheer remained. But I noticed the subtle steering toward the far end of the table, next to the toddler's high chair. I smiled as if it didn't matter, but the message was there, tucked beneath the politeness. It wasn't about the seat, it was about where they thought I belonged. We passed dishes, exchanged small talk, and pretended everything was warm and comfortable. My plate filled with roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, but the food tasted faintly metallic on my tongue. I nodded along to Bryn's updates about the children's school, Arthur's work schedule, and the neighbor's new fence. The conversation seemed to pass over me, as if I were an ornament at the table rather than a voice in it. After the meal, I helped carry plates to the kitchen, weaving through the narrow hall that led from the dining room. Halfway there, I heard Bryn's voice, low but not low enough, slipping through the doorway. "She's comfortable here for now, but not for long." The words floated on a casual tone, as though she were discussing a piece of furniture. My breath caught, my body going still. A beat later, she laughed softly, a sound that didn't match the content of her sentence. I stepped back, waited for the clink of dishes in the sink, then quietly returned to my seat in the dining room. No one noticed, or maybe no one cared. Dessert came and went. Apple pie, slightly warm, with vanilla ice cream melting into golden syrup on the plates. That's when Arthur's cousin leaned toward me, his elbows resting on the table. His voice was friendly enough, but there was a strange precision to his words. "So, do you think you'll keep the place much longer?" I froze for a fraction of a second before lifting my teacup to my lips. The porcelain felt hot against my fingers. "I haven't thought about it," I said evenly, my eyes on the steam curling up from the cup. But I had thought about it. A lot. And now, my mind was spinning. Why would he ask me that unless someone had already planted the idea? The chatter around us blurred into background noise. My attention narrowed to the weight of the question and the implications behind it. Later that night, my own home felt different. The living room was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Outside, streetlights flickered to life, stretching shadows across the hardwood floor. I sat with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at the familiar furniture, the family photos along the mantel, and wondering how many of those smiles were real. I replayed the day. Bryn's subtle seating arrangement, the overheard words in the kitchen, the cousin's strange question. None of it felt accidental. None of it felt harmless. If they were making plans for me, it was time I started making plans of my own. I was sitting in my garden, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The late morning air in Houston carried that gentle crispness of early autumn, the kind that reminded me of my late husband's Memorial Day. The memory came uninvited, as memories often do, and I felt that familiar sting in my chest. Back then, I had arrived early, thinking I'd be seated near our children, surrounded by the people who had shared my life for decades. But when I entered the hall, I saw Arthur had arranged the seating for convenience, as he called it. I was placed at a side table away from the main family row, right next to the caterer's station. I smiled through it, telling myself it was just poor planning. But sitting there in the garden now, I realized it wasn't an isolated moment. These quiet displacements had been happening for years, like little pebbles dropped into a jar, each one taking up more space than I allowed myself to admit. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the mailbox, flipping through the envelopes like I always did. Junk mail, a flyer for a roofing company, a water bill, and then I stopped. There was a letter from the Homeowners Association, but the name printed above my address wasn't mine. It was Arthur's. The property was still legally in my name. My mortgage was paid off years ago. My thumb traced the bold letters of his name as if touching it might make it make sense. I didn't open it. Instead, I walked straight to the hallway drawer, the one where I kept things I didn't want to deal with immediately. Inside, I already had a small stack of odd documents, stray bills, bank mailers, and now this HOA letter, all addressed to Arthur. My drawer of questions. The next day, Arthur called. It was casual, like any other check-in, but in the middle of talking about the weather and his work schedule, he slipped. "Once we get the place fixed up, it'll be perfect for us," he said, as if the words had been rehearsed in his mind. I froze. "We?" I asked lightly, though my hand had tightened around the phone. "You know, me and Bryn," he replied, as if clarifying something obvious. I kept my voice neutral. He moved on quickly, talking about replacing the fence and maybe adding a deck. I barely heard him. My mind was circling that "we" like a hawk over prey. It wasn't a conversation about helping me renovate. It was a conversation about what they would do with the house, my house, once I was out of it. That evening, I pulled the drawer open and spread the contents on the kitchen table. HOA letters, a bank brochure addressed to Arthur. The memory of Bryn's voice saying, "She's comfortable here for now, but not for long." The cousin's question about whether I'd keep the place. Arthur's casual, "we." One by one, I lined them up in order. When I stepped back, I could see it. The outline of something I'd been avoiding naming. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. The morning light spilled across the kitchen table, catching the edge of my coffee cup. I'd chosen this spot intentionally. It was where Arthur and I had shared quiet breakfasts when he was a boy, and I hoped some echo of those days might soften him now. He arrived right on time, his easy smile in place. I gestured for him to sit, poured his coffee the way he liked it, black with just a hint of sugar, and folded my hands on the table. "Arthur," I began, keeping my voice steady. "This is my house. It's not yours to plan for." He sipped, set the cup down, and offered a polite, almost bored, "Of course, Mom." The words sounded agreeable, but his eyes drifted toward the window, as though there was something more interesting outside than my boundaries. I leaned forward. "I'm not talking about someday, I mean now. Whatever you and Bryn have been discussing, it needs to stop." His smile tightened. "You're overthinking, Mom. We just want what's best for you." It was the same phrase Dean once used years ago, "What's best for you," always meaning what's easiest for them. I swallowed my frustration, choosing silence over another round of empty assurances. Later that afternoon, I passed the open doorway to the den and heard Arthur's voice. He was on the couch with Bryn, their conversation punctuated by soft laughter. "She's being territorial again," Arthur said, his tone light but edged with something sharper. Bryn chuckled. "We'll let her keep thinking it's hers for now." The casual cruelty of it made me pause mid-step. My hands curled into fists, nails biting my palms. They weren't just making plans, they were mocking me while doing it. I stepped back into the hallway before they noticed I'd been there. By evening, the house had settled into its usual quiet, but then I caught the low murmur of Arthur's voice again. I followed it to my study, where the door was half open. He was on speakerphone with someone, his contractor, from the sound of it. "So, once we get the new flooring in, we'll move on to the kitchen," he said. "Our place is going to look incredible." Our place. Not a single mention of me. I stood still, my hand resting on the doorframe, listening as he discussed timelines, budgets, and design choices. Each word was a stone on the growing wall between us. I steadied my breathing until the conversation ended. Then I quietly closed the door, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of knowing I'd heard. That night, I went to my bedroom closet and pulled down a metal lockbox from the top shelf. Inside were my most important documents: title deeds, bank statements, insurance policies. I sat cross-legged on the bed, sorting them into neat piles, my fingers moving with deliberate care. If Arthur wouldn't hear my words, maybe he'd understand my actions. The morning sunlight slanted through my kitchen blinds, striping the countertop in pale gold. I had been up since dawn, sorting and resorting the documents I'd pulled from the locked file box last night. They were neatly stacked now in my leather tote: bank statements, insurance forms, and, most importantly, the original deed to my house. I called Arthur early and suggested breakfast at the little diner near the park. It was a place where the waitstaff knew my order before I sat down and where emotions tended to stay polite, no matter the topic. I figured if I was going to draw a line, I'd do it somewhere public, with the smell of bacon and coffee softening the blow. When I arrived, Arthur was already in a booth, scrolling on his phone. He looked up and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Mom," he said, sliding his phone onto the table. "Long time no see." "It's been a week," I replied, easing into the seat across from him. I ordered my usual coffee and oatmeal, and he went for a full plate of eggs and sausage. We made small talk at first: weather, football, the new grocery store opening down the street. But my mind was elsewhere, my fingers brushing the edge of the tote beside me. I waited until the waitress refilled our cups before leaning forward. "Arthur," I said evenly, "I want to be clear about something. I am not a temporary resident in my own home. That house is mine." He blinked, then gave a short, almost amused chuckle. "Mom, you've got it all wrong. You're misunderstanding." I held his gaze. "No, I don't think I am." He leaned back, his tone soft but condescending. "You must have misheard conversations. Bryn and I were just talking about fixing up the place for the future. Our future. You've been a little forgetful lately, and I think maybe—" I raised a hand, cutting him off. "Don't." He stopped, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth as if humoring me. But I could see the tightening in his jaw. He was trying to gaslight me, the way someone might nudge a picture frame slightly askew and insist it had always been that way. I let a moment of silence hang between us, then reached into my tote. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out the thick cream envelope and slid its contents across the table. Arthur's fork froze halfway to his mouth as his eyes fell on the deed. The embossed seal caught the light, and for a second, I thought I saw the faintest crack in his composure. "Misunderstanding this?" I asked, my voice low but steady. He set down his fork and wiped his hands with the napkin, avoiding my eyes. "That's not— Mom, you don't need to be dramatic." I leaned in slightly, my tone calm but unyielding. "If you keep pushing me out, Arthur, you won't like where this ends." The clatter of dishes from the kitchen filled the silence between us. He looked down at the papers again, then back up at me, but didn't say another word. I had only meant to be gone for an hour, 2 at most. The grocery bags were still heavy in my hands when I pulled into the driveway and saw them. 2 unfamiliar sedans, neatly parked as though they belonged here. My heart sank even before my mind caught up. Through the front window, I caught sight of Arthur, standing tall in the living room. His arm swept across the space like a game show host, revealing the grand prize. The couple beside him nodded politely, their eyes roaming over the crown molding, the hardwood floors, the very bones of my home. The bags dug into my palms as I climbed the front steps. Each footfall felt heavier, my pulse matching the thud of my shoes. This was no misunderstanding. This was deliberate. I opened the door slowly, letting the cool air of the living room spill toward me. Arthur froze mid-sentence. The couple turned, startled, their polite smiles faltering when they saw me. "Oh, this is my mother," Arthur said quickly, stepping forward as if to block my view. "She's just visiting." As though I hadn't lived and breathed inside these walls for decades. "Actually," I said, setting the grocery bags on the nearest chair, "I live here. This is my home." Arthur's smile tightened. "Mom, we were just—" I wasn't finished. I cut in, my voice calm but firm. Before you go any further with your little presentation, I think these folks deserve to know something important. The couple exchanged glances, the woman shifting her purse strap nervously. I own this house, I said clearly, my gaze sweeping from Arthur to them. Completely. My name is on the deed, not his. He has no authority to sell it. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. The man cleared his throat. Oh, we see. Well, I think we should go. Arthur's jaw flexed, but he stepped back, letting them pass. I'll be in touch, he muttered to them as they hurried out. The door clicked shut behind them, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then Arthur spun on me. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? He snapped. I didn't flinch. You humiliated yourself when you forgot who built this home and who kept it standing after your father died. His eyes narrowed. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, deliberate tone. You have no idea what you've just started. I met his stare without blinking, even as something colder than fear settled in my chest. Arthur's text came just as I was finishing the dishes. Family meeting at 7. You should be there. No explanation, no hint of what the meeting was about. I didn't need one. After the scene with the potential buyers earlier today, I could smell the setup from miles away. Still, if he wanted to gather an audience, I'd give him one, and I'd bring my own props. By the time I arrived, the living room was already staged like a courtroom. Arthur sat in the center of the couch, Bryn on one side, her legs crossed, holding a glass of wine as if this were a casual social. Two of Arthur's aunts were on the armchairs, and his cousin Tyler leaned against the wall, scrolling through his phone. Mom, Arthur said, gesturing to the empty chair directly across from him. Glad you could make it. We just wanted to clear the air. I sat without removing my coat. Clear the air? I kept my tone flat. That's a new one. Arthur folded his hands together, the way he always did when he was about to deliver a performance. We've all been worried. You've been holding on to things that maybe aren't yours to hold on to anymore. And I think it's time we talk about the future of the house. The aunts shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. Tyler didn't look up from his phone. Bryn leaned forward slightly, her voice soft, concerned, the way you'd speak to a patient. We've noticed little things, misplacing bills, forgetting dates. We're just worried about your memory, that's all. I felt a hot sting rise in my chest, but I kept my face still. I scanned the room slowly, letting the silence stretch just enough to make them fidget. My memory is just fine, Bryn, but it's nice to know you've been keeping such close tabs on me. Arthur jumped in. Mom, no one's attacking you. We just want what's best. What's best for you? I cut in, my voice sharper now. Let's not pretend this is about my well-being. Bryn's lips curled in a small, knowing smile, but she didn't speak. One of the aunts cleared her throat. I reached down to the leather satchel at my feet and placed a manila folder on the coffee table. I slid it toward Arthur with one finger. You're so worried about my memory. Then maybe you should read these, loudly, for everyone. Arthur frowned but didn't move to touch them. Tyler, finally curious, set down his phone. What is it? The deed, I said simply. With my name, my signature, my legal right. And no. I leaned forward, catching Arthur's eyes. It's not up for discussion. The room went still. The ticking of the wall clock seemed suddenly too loud. Arthur's jaw tightened, his fingers twitched against his knees. He didn't reach for the papers. Well, one of the aunts said after a beat, that seems pretty clear to me. Bryn's gaze dropped to the folder, then flicked back up to me, her expression hardening. Arthur leaned back, trying for a casual shrug, but his voice was taut. This isn't over, not by a long shot. I picked up the folder, slid it back into my bag, and stood. No, Arthur, I said quietly. It's not. But remember, Your move came first. The rain began in the late afternoon, slow at first, then thickening into sheets that blurred the streetlights. I stood by the front window, arms folded, watching the driveway darken under the storm. My phone lay on the kitchen counter, its sent messages glowing back at me. 8 invitations, sent to only those who needed to be here tonight. No more, no less. The first knock came just after 7. My neighbor, Evelyn, stepped in, shaking off her umbrella. Her eyes met mine with a wordless understanding. She'd agreed to come as a witness, nothing more, but her presence was a steadying anchor. One by one, the others arrived. My sister, my eldest niece, 2 cousins, and finally, Arthur and his wife. He entered with the swagger of someone expecting to control the room. He was wrong. We gathered in the dining room. The storm outside rattled the windows, but inside the air was still, heavy with the quiet before a strike. I stayed standing at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," I began, voice calm but without softness. "We need to clear up a matter that's been clouding this family." Arthur smirked, glancing at Bryn as though sharing an inside joke. "Mom, if this is about the house again—" "It is," I cut in, not raising my voice but slicing through his. "And it's about the truth." I turned to the stack of documents on the table, sliding the first set toward the center. "These are copies from the county clerk's office. They show that 2 weeks ago someone initiated paperwork to transfer the deed of my house into Arthur Crow's name, without my knowledge or consent." Gasps broke the silence. My niece's hand flew to her mouth. My sister's eyes narrowed. Arthur leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, an easy grin tugging at his lips. "That's ridiculous. Anyone could have—" "Don't," I warned. My voice stayed level, but the weight in it made the room still again. "Evelyn," I said, turning to my neighbor, "would you please tell them what you overheard last week?" Evelyn clasped her hands on the table. "I was trimming the hedge by our property line. I heard Arthur on the phone saying, 'Once Mom's out of the way, we can finalize the transfer.' I didn't think it was my place to interfere then, but now I see I should have said something." Bryn's gaze dropped to the table, her thumb tracing a circle on the wood grain. Arthur's grin faltered, just slightly. "People hear what they want to hear," he muttered. I slid another paper forward, this one on crisp letterhead. "This is from my attorney. It's a cease and desist order. Arthur, if you make another move to touch what is mine, I will see you in court, and you will lose." A murmur ran around the table. My sister sat back, studying Arthur with open disappointment. The storm outside cracked with thunder, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Arthur's chair scraped back against the floor. He leaned forward, planting both hands flat on the table. "You'll regret this, Mom," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. I didn't flinch. "I already regret raising a son who thinks he can take what doesn't belong to him." The rain beat harder against the glass as he straightened, his eyes narrowing into something colder than I'd ever seen from him. I held his gaze until he finally looked away. The morning light was dull and heavy, filtering through the curtains like it carried the weight of last night's words. I woke earlier than usual, my body restless even after a night of tossing and turning. The house felt different, quieter, yet every creak and groan of the old wood seemed louder, like it was trying to remind me that I was still here, and so was it. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising. My mind replayed the confrontation, Arthur's hand slamming on the table, the anger in his eyes when I refused to step aside. Those moments had replayed in my dreams, only in them I'd answered back harder, sharper. My phone lit up with a missed call from my attorney. The voicemail was short, but carried a note of reassurance. "The legal hold has been processed. I'll update you later today." I took a slow breath. The hold meant Arthur couldn't move anything related to the house, financially or legally, without my consent. It was a small victory, but in this battle, even small victories mattered. By mid-morning, I heard a light knock on the door. I hesitated before opening it. It wasn't Arthur, it was Bryn. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her makeup minimal, and there was something in her eyes I couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside without saying much, motioning toward the living room. She perched on the edge of the couch like she was ready to run at any moment. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice low. "I knew about the plan." My stomach tightened. I didn't think Arthur would actually go through with it, but he kept saying it was best for everyone. That the house would be easier to manage if it was in his name. I stared at her, trying to decide if this was guilt or damage control. "And you didn't say anything?" I asked. "I thought if I stayed quiet, it would keep the peace," she said, looking away. "But last night, seeing how far it's gone, I can't keep pretending I didn't know." Her confession didn't surprise me. What hurt was how unsurprised I actually felt. I simply nodded, not offering her the comfort she might have been hoping for. An hour after she left, my phone rang again. It was my attorney. "The joint account for property taxes and maintenance is officially frozen," he said. "Pending the outcome of the investigation, Arthur won't be able to use it for anything." I thanked him, feeling a tight sense of satisfaction. It didn't take long for word to spread. Arthur's number flashed across my phone screen 3 times in the next hour. I let every call go to voicemail, then a text from Mrs. Landry, my neighbor. "Your son's in a rage. Be careful." I pulled the curtains closed. The weight of the fabric felt like a shield. I walked through the house, locking the back door, then the front. It wasn't just about safety, it was a declaration. This was my space, my home. And from this moment forward, I was done leaving the door open for reconciliation that would never come. I had just set my coffee mug in the sink when it started. A loud, aggressive knock on the front door. Not the kind of knock you give when you're asking permission to enter, but the kind that dares you to answer. The pounding grew louder, each thud a reminder that this wasn't over. The pounding on the door had finally stopped, replaced by a tense stillness that seemed to cling to the air. I knew he wasn't gone for good. Arthur never walked away without having the last word. Sure enough, when I pulled the door open, he was there, red-faced, jaw tight. "You've destroyed this family's stability," he said before I could speak. "Freezing that account. What were you thinking?" I stepped aside, my voice steady. "I was thinking it's time we had this conversation, with someone else in the room to keep it honest." His brow furrowed, suspicion flickering in his eyes, but he stepped in anyway. His anger radiated off him in waves, but I wouldn't match it. Not this time. In the living room, the mediator sat waiting. A woman in her 50s with calm, measured eyes, she rose to greet Arthur. "I'm here to help make sure this discussion stays productive." Arthur blinked, caught off guard. He glanced at me, then at her, clearly recalculating. I gestured toward the coffee table, where a neat stack of documents lay waiting. "These," I said, sliding the top folder toward him, "are copies of the property documents. My name, my ownership. Every detail you've been pretending doesn't exist." His jaw tightened as he flipped through the papers. "This is unnecessary," he muttered. "You're making this bigger than it is." "No, Arthur," I said evenly. "You made it bigger when you tried to rewrite the facts." The mediator leaned forward, her voice even. "Arthur, this isn't just about perception. Legally, your mother holds sole ownership. Any action to alter that without her consent is problematic." He shifted uncomfortably, looking for an escape route in the conversation. That was when I opened the second folder. "These," I said, "are records from the joint account we used for property taxes. Imagine my surprise to see charges for a weekend at the Gulf Coast Resort, designer suits, and a down payment on a car I've never seen." Arthur's face lost some of its color. "That's not—" The mediator cut in. "If these expenditures came from a shared account without both parties' consent, it could constitute financial mismanagement. Continued behavior like this could have legal consequences." For once, Arthur was silent. His shoulders slumped slightly, and I could almost see the gears turning in his head. I had taken the one thing he valued most, control, and placed it firmly back in my own hands. "Here's what's going to happen from now on," I said, leaning forward. "No more access to my accounts. No discussions about my property without me present. And if you step out of line again, the next person you'll hear from will be my attorney, not me." Arthur stood abruptly, shoving the papers back toward the table. "Fine," he said, voice tight. "But this isn't over." I watched him walk out, the door closing harder than necessary behind him. The house was quiet again, but this time it felt different. He had lost something in that exchange, and we both knew it. I was stacking the papers back into my bag when my phone buzzed. An unknown number lit up the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Mrs. Morley?" a young woman's voice said. "This is Linda, your attorney's assistant. We found something else." My hand tightened around the phone. "What is it?" "You'll want to sit down for this," she said, her voice trembling. The morning light spilled across the kitchen table, catching in the steam rising from my coffee. It had been 2 weeks since the mediator meeting, and the house felt quieter than it had in months. Not peaceful exactly, but still. Arthur hadn't called. No text. No unexpected visits. I knew better than to mistake the silence for remorse. Silence, in my family, had always been strategy. I sipped slowly, letting the bitter taste settle on my tongue, and thought about how much my life had changed in such a short time. The boundaries I'd set were firm now, like locks on a door I'd never thought to close before. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else's approval before making a decision about my own home. Still, there was that quiet hum of vigilance beneath my calm. The kind you feel when you know the storm has passed overhead, but the clouds haven't yet broken apart. Around mid-morning, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find Susan, a woman I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Once, she had been like family. Our children had grown up together, our husbands had been fishing buddies. But when my late husband died, contact faded. She stood there now, her raincoat damp from a drizzle I hadn't noticed, a manila envelope clutched to her chest. "I thought you should know something," she said, stepping inside when I gestured. Her eyes flicked toward the living room as if checking for eavesdroppers. We sat, and she leaned in. "Arthur's been doing this kind of thing for years. Not just with you." She opened the envelope to reveal photocopies of property records, bank statements, even email exchanges, names I recognized, neighbors, a cousin who had gone strangely quiet a few years back, surfaced in her stories. Each page was another weight on my chest, another reminder that my son's betrayal wasn't an isolated moment, it was a pattern. By the time she left, the sun had pushed through the clouds, but I didn't feel any lighter. If anything, I felt vindicated and a little sick. All those years, I'd told myself Arthur's behavior came from stress, from bad advice, from desperation. But looking at the dates and signatures, I saw intention. Not an hour later, my phone rang. It was Martin, my attorney. "We found something else," he said, his voice clipped with the kind of energy I'd learned meant good news for my side. "Hidden assets. 2 accounts, both under a shell name. But the paper trail links directly to Arthur. If we move forward, this could give us full leverage." I stood by the kitchen window as he spoke, watching a pair of cardinals hop across the lawn. The air felt suddenly electric. This was the kind of evidence that could seal everything. Financial security, legal victory, the end of any doubt about who held the real power. I should have been elated. Instead, a knot tightened in my stomach. That night, I sat with the file in front of me, the documents Susan had given me, and the new findings from Martin. The case against Arthur was more than solid now. It was ironclad. All I had to do was give the word, and the legal machinery would roll forward, crushing whatever was left of our relationship. But there was that Mo Neo Hai Vong, the anchor of memory I couldn't quite sever. It wasn't the house or the money. It was the image of Arthur at 12 years old, standing in our backyard with a baseball glove, waving at me to watch his pitch. It was the sound of his laugh before adulthood made him guarded. Those moments, though distant, were part of the same thread as this hurt. I reached for my phone to call Martin, my mind made up to give him the green light. But just as my finger hovered over the contact, the screen lit up with another name, Arthur. My breath caught. I took a deep breath, wondering if this was the call to end everything, or to begin again. The courtroom was cool and still, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound until the judge entered. I sat with my attorney at my side, my hands folded in my lap, my breath steady. This was it, the final hearing. Arthur sat a few rows away, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of the past few months had carved away at him. When the judge read the decision, the words felt like the closing of a heavy door. The property remained mine, indisputably. Arthur's concealed assets, 2 accounts and an investment property, were to be seized and redistributed to settle legal costs and restitution. His reputation in the community would bear the mark of this outcome. I felt no surge of triumph, only a deep, steady release. Justice had been served, but it hadn't erased the ache. I gathered my things quietly when it was over, stepping out into the bright Houston sun. The air felt different, lighter, but also unfamiliar. Back home, I began packing the last of my belongings. I had decided to sell the house, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Too many shadows lingered in the corners, too many echoes in the walls. As I pulled down a stack of cookbooks from the kitchen shelf, a slim envelope slipped out and landed on the counter. My name was written on it in my late husband's familiar hand. I stood still for a long moment before opening it. His words unfolded like a warm hand on my shoulder. If you are reading this, it means life has tested you in ways neither of us could have imagined. You have always been the stronger one, even when you doubted it. Protect what matters, and never let anyone take away your voice or your place. This home was built with love, but it is you who makes it worth keeping. The tears came quietly, not from sadness but from the recognition that I had done exactly what he had asked. Stood firm, protected myself, and refused to be erased. I placed the letter back in the envelope and tucked it into my purse, a piece of him to carry forward. 2 weeks later, I hosted a small dinner in my new home, a modest, sunlit place with a garden just big enough for herbs and flowers. Around my table sat friends who had stood by me, a cousin who had quietly sent supportive texts, and my neighbor who had testified when it mattered most. We passed bowls of roasted vegetables, clinked glasses, and shared laughter that felt unforced. This was family too, the kind you choose, the kind that chooses you back. The next morning, I stepped outside for a walk. The air was crisp, the early sun catching on the leaves of the trees that lined my street. My footsteps were unhurried, my heart lighter than it had been in years. The house I'd left behind was no longer a wound, it was a chapter, finished and shelved. Arthur's absence was a hollow I had learned to live with, and perhaps one day to fill in a different way. But my life was mine again. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. I was walking toward something entirely mine. Looking back, I've learned that protecting your peace and your place in this world isn't selfish, it's necessary. No matter how deeply betrayal cuts, you have the right to stand tall, claim what's yours, and build a life on your own terms. Family isn't always defined by blood, but by respect, loyalty, and love freely given. If my story teaches anything, it's this. Never let anyone silence your voice or rewrite your worth. What about you? Have you ever had to draw a line and stand your ground, even with family? I'd love to hear your story. If this video touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't enjoy it, share why. I welcome your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Your voice matters here.